Welcome to the Justice Wrap-Up Podcast. In the landmark 1963 case, Gideon versus Wainwright, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled that every person accused of a crime in America must be provided a lawyer, regardless of their ability to pay. Each episode of the Justice Wrap-Up Podcast will explore the critical role public defenders play in addressing a wide range of issues facing marginalized communities with subject matter experts, key opinion leaders, and people impacted by the American criminal justice system. Listen as a community of advocates discuss their work to strengthen public defenders and transform public defense.
November is Native American Heritage Month, and we're dedicating this month's podcast episode to learning more about the injustice and legal hardships Native Americans face within our country every day. Today, we're lucky to be joined by a public defender, Melanie Yazza. Melanie and I actually go back about a decade, although I haven't seen Melanie in a long time. So I'm really excited, Melanie, to have you with us and to reconnect and to have this conversation with you. I know Melanie from her work at the Gila River Indian community, where she was a senior attorney and for a while acting director for defense services. She was there when Gila River Indian community and Gideon's Promise first started a partnership. And she's now a defender with the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, also in Arizona. She has extensive experience representing indigent clients in tribal court and also a tribal member of the Navajo Nation. So welcome, Melanie.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'd love to start by just having you tell the audience a little bit about why you became a public defender and what your journey's been like so far.
I didn't start off knowing what I wanted to do per se. I knew I wanted to work in the criminal law area. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background, because I kind of came from more of a prosecutorial side. When I was growing up on the reservation, there was a lot of domestic violence involved. And, this was obviously before, domestic violence laws were in effect. And so, oftentimes police came, if they were even called, nothing really happened. They might separate people, but, as kids growing up in this, you saw a lot of domestic violence, a lot of stuff not, getting addressed, and nobody really like addressing children. And I had seen a program, I had heard about a program where victims advocates would go out and do crisis counseling work with children who were victims of crime, regardless of the crime, but it focused mostly on domestic violence. So when I graduated from college, I started volunteering for a county attorney's office in Pima County Attorney's Office, working with their victim crisis program, or I forgot exactly what it was called. It's a victims advocate program. And so I did a lot of crisis counseling. We would go to crime scenes. And so I was very pro prosecution, because you only really get to see the one side, right? And when I went to law school, I knew I wanted to go into criminal law. And I started working I worked at the public defender's office, or I interned at the prosecutor's office, interned for judges. And you definitely get a different, I was able to get a different perspective from all sides. So when I got out, I didn't have a desire, like a lot of defense attorneys, they're like, I wanted to be a defense attorney right when I got out. And it wasn't really even that. It was just, I wanted to work in criminal law, and I wanted to help people. And I really was kind of focusing on victims of crimes and getting, that they were, addressed, that their needs were addressed. And I started working, I applied to lots of jobs, and I got hired by Gila River. And so when I started working there, we obviously get to see the other side of it, which I already knew just in growing up with it, but you didn't really truly understand that you just saw a person doing something bad and that was it. Obviously, there's a background to that. They didn't grow up like that. Weren't born like that. And so that's where my, love for being a defense attorney came in, is just that getting to know every individual, different crimes, obviously not the same crimes that I necessarily personally saw, but all types of crimes, sex offenders, obviously lots of domestic violence, drug offenses. I think a lot of times people ask how you can do this, which of course we all have been asked that as a defense attorney. And you kind of just have to explain to them that these individuals didn't just grow up like this. They're a product of their environment, their community. Individuals that may be a victim, if they are in certain crimes, may grow up to be the person we're protecting now is going to may grow up to be the offender. And they also have a right to be treated fairly and with respect and their rights protected. And not as much as anybody else, as much as the victims in the system. So it just happened. That's the job I got first, was as defense attorney, and I just stayed with it, and I, never changed, and I wouldn't want to change.
Yeah, no, and it's so interesting because certainly, I mean, in my experience, and I think every public defender I know has the experience where people who are victimized, one day, people who are complaining witnesses for the prosecution one day are accused and needing lawyers the next day. It sounds like that was your experience. And it sounds like when you were growing up, you saw people who were victims of crime who were not able to access the justice system. But then when they were accused, the justice system seemed to be in full throttle. I'm wondering, is that accurate? Is that sort of what you were seeing happening in your community?
Yes. And yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the particular things that I saw were mostly domestic violence, substance abuse, alcohol was the main issue that created the situation where domestic violence occurred. And back then, before there were domestic violence laws, there was, a lot of times we didn't see, the person committing the offense, anything happened to them, right? So the victims, the parent, the mother, usually the female, the children, nothing was getting addressed with them. They had to just kind of live with this. And that's kind of where it started with me. And so a lot of times I didn't see anything happening to the person who's committing the crimes. Obviously, since laws have changed, it's different. And this is just in the community that I lived in. It could be different in other communities, because in the Navajo reservation, it's a very rural community. The police department, there's not a lot of police officers, and it's very different than what I'm probably going to talk about later in a lot of other tribal areas, where it takes a long time sometimes for a police officer to get out to a home. And so there could have been a lot of reasons why a person wasn't arrested. So I didn't see a lot of individuals getting arrested, and it's I think there's a good side and a bad side to that. One, we just weren't mass incarcerating people, kind of like I feel like is being done now. And that's all that's, we're going to arrest them, whatever. We're not going to try to look for any services for them. But, including children, I can tell you that I wasn't the best kid on earth either. And I probably, if I lived on the reservation now and did the stuff that I did as a kid now, I would have definitely been in jail a few times. And I've never signed the jail. My mom, would take me to the jail sometimes and have officers talk to me, and nothing happened. And so, but you obviously learn how to be, how to do better. And I was also a product of my environment. I didn't really have a lot of people monitoring me. So eventually you learn. And if I had that criminal background, even as a juvenile, who knows if I would have been able to, what I would have done if I would have gone to law school or whatever. So I think there was some pros and cons to not immediately arresting people back then, as opposed to now, where we see lots of people, kids being arrested in jail for just nonsense. So yes, I did. Back to your question. Yes, I saw victims not being appropriately addressed, but the defendants weren't going to work, the rest wasn't happening. And that was just in my jurisdiction. I can't tell you what was happening in other jurisdictions where there was probably more police availability.
Right. And Melanie, you currently do work in what's called tribal court. And our listeners are familiar with state courts, likely federal courts, but tribal courts are different. Could you tell us a little bit about what tribal courts are and how they differ from sort of state and federal courts?
Well, tribal courts are similar in the way I try to explain this to individuals. They're treated, if you think of, they're treated similar to the way a state is given they're allowed to make their own laws. They have jurisdiction over crimes that occur within tribal community. So every tribe, there's hundreds of tribes throughout the United States. Every tribe can create their own laws. So they don't have to follow the state laws. They can completely just create their own laws. What I've seen, and I've only worked in Arizona tribal courts, is that most of the time they adopt a lot of the state laws or take a little bit of the state and the federal laws. And so that's how they've created their codes. So tribal courts are different from the state and federal, just the same way that every state is different from every state. So the tribes can create their own laws and they govern in the crimes that occur within the jurisdiction of the reservation. So Navajo tribe can create its own law and govern only in crimes that occur on the Navajo reservation. Gila River only on their reservation, Salt River only on their reservation. Let's see, there's an evolution of who they have jurisdiction over. So previously to, I think it was, trying to think of when law went into effect, I think it was 2012. Previously, that tribes only had jurisdiction over Native Americans who committed crimes on the reservation. So they didn't have jurisdiction over non-natives who committed crimes on the reservation. So if a non-native came onto the reservation, committed a crime, nothing may happen to them. If it's a serious enough case, because the feds have dual jurisdiction on tribal lands, the feds might take jurisdiction over that non-native, or the state if there's some kind of agreement between the tribe and the nearest, the state that they're within. But sometimes nothing would happen. So a lot of times domestic violence, non-natives who came out, who were living in tribal communities, committing crimes of domestic violence, nothing might happen to them, especially if it wasn't serious enough to take federally. That changed in 2000. That changed. I think it was in 2000.
The Violence Against Women's Act.
Correct. Right. That changed. I think it was in 2012. Where they did where the tribes where we're now allowed to have jurisdiction over non-natives for certain offenses. Now tribes have jurisdiction over non-natives who commit those types of crimes on tribal land. And I guess the unique thing about tribal courts are, I guess, jurisdiction generally, is that the feds do have dual jurisdiction over many crimes, mostly serious offenses. So if a non-native commits an offense in tribal land, they can get charged and convicted in tribal land. They can also get charged and convicted in federal court for the exact same, act. And there's not any double jeopardy. And there's a reason for that, and I'll explain that later. It's based off of the maximum sentencing policies that tribes can give for crimes.
And so let me ask you, Melanie, what are some of the greatest challenges that Native people face within the criminal legal system?
Well, there's quite a bit, but let me just go back real quick, because I wanted to just talk, I guess I forgot to talk about this portion about, so every tribal jurisdiction, every tribe, the maximum penalty under the Indian Civil Rights Act, the maximum penalty prior to 2010 that a person could be convicted of any one offense was 1 year detention and or a $5,000 fine. So if you were convicted for murder, the max you could get was 1 year, right? And or a $5,000 fine. But that's kind of why there's the dual jurisdiction with the feds, because obviously that would not be fair, right? So the feds could also take you and charge you and take you to, you could have to resolve that in tribal court as well. In 2010, there was the Tribal Law and Order Act was implemented as part of the Indian Civil Rights Act, which allowed tribes to enhance their sentencing to a maximum of 3 years detention per offense. So not just per case, but per offense. So if they had five charges, and they could get a maximum of 3 years detention per offense if it qualified under those offenses. So those offenses had to be something that were could be considered a felony off the reservation, or sentenced to more than 1 year detention off the reservation. So now tribes have the ability to have enhanced sentencing. The maximum they can get in one case is 9 years detention. But not every tribe has implemented that portion of the law. Not every tribe has implemented TLOA because there's certain standards that they have to fulfill. One, their jails have to, I guess, pass a certain standard that are equivalent to whatever the federal jails have to fulfill. They are required to give a defendant they have a right to a defense attorney if they're indigent. Whereas if it's less than 1 year, they do not have that right. They don't have a right to an attorney that's paid for by the community. But if they're looking at something more than 1 year, then they do. And the judge has to be has to have sufficient legal training to preside over a criminal proceeding, and it has to be licensed to practice law by any jurisdiction of the United States. You can be, some tribes and some courts have determined that as long as they're licensed to practice in any jurisdiction means even if they're licensed to practice in another tribal jurisdiction. So if they got a license to practice in, let's say, Pasco-Yaqui, which I'll tell you, the requirements to get a license to practice there could be very minimal. That would satisfy this requirement as far as what kind of judge is presiding. So that's became a problem because I think what is interesting is you don't have to be, when you're working in tribal courts, you don't have to be a licensed attorney. You can be something called an advocate, which means as long as if you're a Native American, you can practice law in tribal courts as long as you are, the courts allow you to, they license you to practice. And all jurisdictions have different requirements for that. So some, you just have to fill out an application and pay a fee. So my son, who's never practiced any law, not gone to law school, would go and fill out an application, pay a fine, and if you're a certain age, don't have, maybe they might have, say, no criminal offenses. Every tribe is different, that how you can practice law there, then you can go practice.
Wow.
So there's a problem with representation, right? On some individuals if they hire an advocate, there could be some problems there. So yeah, tribal courts it's a unique place to work.
So Melanie, I'm curious because it sounds like many tribes have adopted some of the more punitive aspects of the American criminal legal system. But I assume that a tribe would be able to adopt alternatives to incarceration, engage in restorative justice, engage in resolutions to conflict that are more healing. Do you see that on in tribal communities more, or not necessarily?
Well, so I can only talk to what I've seen in the courts that I've worked in, which is primarily in Arizona, and mostly in the two Salt River and Gila River. But yes, the short answer is yes. The tribal courts have the authority to obviously govern and control their courts in any manner that they want and how they want to handle this. So if they wanted a more healing court or wellness court type, or they wanted to have more traditional type of sentencing, however they determine a sentence should be could be directed and written in a way that follows their traditions more. In the courts that I've worked in, there isn't any. I know that they're working on trying to get something implemented. I know here in Salt River, and that's there's a lot to that, but I haven't really seen that so much in the two courts. I do know, like Navajo tribe, they have something called the peacemaking court, and so that's a different, alternative dispute resolution type of program. I don't know what qualifies individuals to be able to go into a dispute peacemakers court as opposed to a traditional venue. So I do know that tribes, some tribes implement those types of resolutions, but it's up to them, and they can. It is up to the tribes to do that.
Yeah. So on this podcast, but really in any conversations about criminal justice, there's a lot of conversation about challenges that people face in the criminal legal system, disproportionately people of color, almost exclusively people without means. Are there challenges unique to Native communities, challenges that Native Americans face in the criminal legal system that are different or unique than what we might see in other contexts?
So off and on and off the reservation. So on the reservation, I think some of the challenges that, again, what I've seen is that the idea of double jeopardy, right? The idea that a person who is picked up could potentially face federal charges, and this is always looming over their head, depending on what the offense is, that they could be charged federally. And I think sometimes that's used to the prosecutor's advantage. And so a lot of times, they might be scared into doing and taking an agreement they may not necessarily want to fight because they're too afraid that they could get charged federally. That happens all the time, and it's unfortunate. I think some of the other challenges are certainly overcharging. There was a study done, I know, of the courts in Gila River a while back, and it was found that there was a lot of overcharging. At one point, I don't know if it's still the case, but Gila River, I think I've heard somewhere that it was considered the most violent tribe in America, and it's just not the case. It's based off of overcharging. You get these long, multiple, charges for something that's not the case at all. So I think there is a lot of overcharging. There's the double jeopardy issue that individuals have to face. There's a lot of non-natives that come in and work in the community. So there's some cultural, lack of cultural education related in there. With regards to police officers, especially, I think generally speaking, I think there's an issue with the way they relate to them. Sometimes even in prosecutor's office, there may not be a lot of native heads, chief prosecutors that are tribal members. And there's just generally a very pro-prosecution environment.
Let me ask you, Melanie, is there a progressive prosecutor movement in tribal courts?
Explain, what do you mean?
So in much of America now, there is this, there are prosecutors running for office who promise to be more progressive, more compassionate, not charge as much. And in some places, that is catching on, and they're becoming elected. I'm wondering, is that something that you're seeing in tribal courts, where maybe, first of all, are prosecutors elected?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So one in the two jurisdictions that I've worked in, prosecutors they're not elected. From what I can see, even from the Navajo tribe, for the most part, prosecutors they're hired. So, however, with regards to just how the evolution of who eventually makes the laws too, how that works, person becomes a prosecutor in tribal court, right? So they're the prosecutor in their jurisdiction. The office of attorney general, which is, works with the, the heads of the tribe, usually hire from the prosecutor's office, or they hire most, predominantly prosecutors, former prosecutors, if they came from another tribe as well. So then those former prosecutors go up and they work for the office of attorney general. Office of attorney general are the ones who amend, create, suggest different laws. So of course these laws are very pro-prosecution, right? And so there is a problem, I think, because there's not a lot of defense input individuals. I mean, they say, they ask cross defense attorneys, defense departments, their input in their stuff, but usually it goes with whatever they have already had their mind set on. So in that sense, there is a difference in elections for judges, though. So every tribe is different on how they want to have their judges. Some tribes, like Gila River, for instance, will only have, you only can be a judge if you are a tribal member and you live in the community, and you're elected. All their judges are elected, except for the felony judge. That one is hired, and he doesn't have to be a Native American. And those judges, the requirements, there's an age requirement, and I think you have to have no felonies, and that's it. There's no educational requirement. This maybe a high school degree. So you can see there's some issues there when you're going up against, you're trying to make legal arguments in individuals who don't necessarily understand how to interpret the law. In Salt River, the judges are not elected, they're hired, and they don't have to necessarily be Native American. They can be anybody. And I think there are certain limit requirements for who is hired as well. The funny thing is, working in both these jurisdictions, I've definitely seen the judges who are hired. How do I say this?
This was I would
prefer the judges who are hired as opposed to judges who are elected.
Interesting.
Because the entire environment is different. Of course, we don't always like what judges have to say. We don't, but the treatment of the way they treat the defendants, the way they treat the practitioners, the general courtroom there's a very different environment in the two different jurisdictions. And I have thoughts on why that is, but I don't think it's just a coincidence. So, and that's just so every jurisdiction is different on how they want to hire how they get their judges as well. So that's another thing that people don't understand is you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer to be a judge in tribal court. So you can simply be of a certain age and have a high school diploma, maybe, sometimes maybe not. And if you run and it's a popularity event, it's an election, you could become a judge.
Right. This is so interesting. I mean, there's so much you're sharing that I didn't understand about tribal courts. So I appreciate that. I'm curious, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wish people knew about Native Americans, their experience with the criminal justice system, the injustice they face at the hands of our legal system, things that you think our listeners should know about what is kind of unique injustices faced by your community?
Well, what I found, what actually was talking to Landon, or not talking to Landon, I had emailed Landon and
Landon is a graduate of Gideon's Promise, and
yes.
a currently faculty member of Gideon's Promise who works in the Gila River Indian community.
And he had mentioned he had brought up an issue of the higher rate of Native Americans who are incarcerated. Obviously, you kind of, we generally know that, but I've never gone in and looked at the numbers. And after he had emailed me some numbers, I had gone in and checked some other numbers, and what he had found was that off the reservation, natives are incarcerated at 2 times the rate of white people. In Arizona specifically, they make up a disproportionate number of people, obviously, in the prison system. In comparison to the actual number percentage-wise of the Native American population in the state of Arizona, it's a very disproportionate. And there's over policing, I know, and that's not in every jurisdiction. In Gila River and Salt River, I think there's lots of police officers. There's plenty of police officers. In like the Navajo tribe, what I was saying before, not. There's definitely not a lot of police officers. I think a lot of this has to do with also the 2 tribes that are in, near Phoenix, which is Gila River and Salt River. They have casinos. There's definitely money that is coming in. There's significantly smaller tribes as opposed to Navajo reservation, bigger, more rural tribe, much bigger tribe. So I'm assuming that's the case for a lot of other tribal jurisdictions, depending on what kind of income they have coming in. But Gila River, what he wrote is Gila River is the home of 14,260 people, according to the 2020 census. There's 150 police officers currently. That's 10.5 police officers per 1,000 people. And that's much higher than compared to most other police communities. And he listed some, like Washington, D.C., there's 5.34 officers per 1,000 people. And that's the next highest. So Gila River has twice as many police officers per 1,000 people for that extremely small community, as opposed to Washington, D.C. Camden, New Jersey, 4.18 police officers per 1,000. Miami Beach, 4. So generally 4 officers, at least in the top, 7, cities that are ranked per, police officers to population ratio. And it just goes down. So there is a tremendous amount of, officers per, and so that leads to obviously arrests, higher arrest rates, right? So when you talk about, the most dangerous, it's not. It's just they're arresting more people. There's kind of a common sense, in working in both jurisdictions. There is a lot of police officers here in Salt River too. And I'm always amazed on how many police officers respond to the most simplest situation. In situations that didn't even come out to be start off as necessarily a crime. Somebody's calling because they're concerned about their individual who is, on drugs and is just kind of, is not being safe. Mm-hmm. There could be 10 officers there. I was watching a body cameras on an individual where somebody overdosed. The call was because a person overdosed. And there was a tremendous amount of police officers there for this. And it ended up turning people getting charged with crimes. It's like this overboard of the officers and then overcharging. And they're not looking at trying, where could we put that money towards helping individuals and try to get it from the front, like addressing the substance abuse issues, addressing the mental health issues. There's a huge substance abuse problem. I can tell you probably almost most of my clients probably have some level of substance abuse. I think that's most of the case here. There's a tremendous fentanyl problem. And I don't think this is unique to a lot of reservations, but what I think is different is some of these tribes, they get a lot of money per capita every now and again. And so that contributes because it goes straight to buying drugs. And that's a whole other issue I could get on. But there's a lot of people in jail who don't need to be in jail, who need help. Substance abuse, they have substance abuse problems. All their crimes are committed when they're using some form of substance. And I wish the money would be focused on this, but police officers, police departments in the 2 communities that I've worked in, they get a lot of money. They get a lot of grants. They get a lot of funding. I've seen, I don't know how this is in other jurisdictions, but they could go to one incident and there might be 4 different case numbers depending on how many persons they arrested. And I don't know if that's because they're trying to increase their numbers to make it look like there's 4 different incidents. Instead of just one case number, 4 individuals arrested under that case number, they will assign a different case number per person. I don't know if that's to increase their numbers to get funding. I don't know. I'm only speculating. So I do believe that there's a lot of over policing. There's a lot of unnecessary arrests, a lot of overcharging. When you look at outside this jurisdiction in individuals who are incarcerated, I was looking at the U.S. Census Bureau, and you know, it stated in 2019, the data showed that there was 10,000 Native Americans in local jails. That doesn't include the individuals in tribal jails.
10,000 in all of the tribal.
It said in local jails outside of the tribe.
Gotcha.
Outside of the tribe, I guess. I did talk about that, but what was interesting to me is it said that the Native American population went up 85% in jails since 2000. So in these, or since the 2019 one, I think that was since 2019, and that didn't include jails. So, and the population of Native Americans has actually gone down a little bit, the actual population, but the increase in the population has gone up in prisons has gone up tremendously.
Wow.
Tribal jails, it said that between 2018 and 2000, the tribal jail population, so individuals in tribal courts on tribal land and tribal jails, has went up 61%. But the local population, people moving off the reservation, the local population have actually decreased slightly, which kind of says a lot of what I'm just saying, like there's this over-policing, overcharging, and obviously a disproportionate amount of Native Americans in jails and prisons on and off the reservation as compared to other ethnic groups, certainly under the non-natives. Yeah.
So Melanie, I want to ask you, I started by saying I haven't seen you in a while, but I've known you for almost a decade. We've had a relationship with your former office, Gila River Indian Community, going back 10 years. And I'm wondering, in what ways have you seen our relationship, the relationship between Gideon's Promise and Gila River, impact the office and the lawyers who are part of this partnership?
What I've seen is the caring, right? The true, like they care about their clients. Like we care about our clients. If we're not just trying to get them through. We're not just, hey, you can take a plea. At least it's disorderly conduct as opposed to, aggravated assault. No, we're going to fight for your case. If you didn't commit this offense, if you want to we're going to do what you want to do. And we're going to show that we care about you. And I've definitely seen that in all individuals in the office there at Gila River who have definitely gone through the program. It's just an environment that we're going to fight for our clients. We're going to do the best we can for our clients. We're not just going to get them to sign a plea because it's a lesser offense. If they want to go to trial, we're going to support them, even in situations that maybe it wasn't the best option, but we're going to obviously do our best and do everything we can. We have limited resources. Because a lot of times the plea offers that were extended were just completely unreasonable. They fought for them. And I think that's what I saw a lot of, is just there was a true caring, not just about the individual, right? They're not just looking at their crime, what they are alleged to have done, but them and their background. And so I definitely have seen that. I continue to see that. I think anybody who gets in a defense attorney there at Gila River they're lucky because, oftentimes individuals like, I don't want a public defender. We all know that. We all know how people feel about public defenders. But when they start working with individuals who definitely have gone through Gideon's Promise, they understand that they care. I love my clients when they say, like, you actually seem like you care about me and not just about this. And that's like the best compliment.
And what a comment about the kind of representation people get, that has to be something that they point out as something they're surprised by, as opposed to just the norm, that there's someone who has their life in their hands who actually cares about them. I got to say, I'm grateful to you for being a part of that community. I love all of the defenders from Gila River that I've gotten to know over the years. They have amazing spirit, and I know they look to you as a real leader. I know you leaving is a great benefit for Salt River, but it's a loss for Gila River, although they've got some great folks coming up. So let me just ask you before we wrap up, is there anything else you would want to say to the audience, just to help them understand anything you want to say to them about anything?
Oh, gosh.
You don't need to, but if there is something, I want to give you a chance to say it.
Well, I mean, I think anyone who is listening to this podcast probably is, we're all kind of on the same wavelength, right? Public defenders wanting to do better representation of our clients. I would just say, keep doing it. I know it's hard. We all know it's hard. We have bad days. Sometimes, it's easy to just be like, this is a good plea offer, but we know that this is a good case for our clients. Like, you just keep fighting, you just keep doing the best you can. And I think what I have really tried to do, because we oftentimes, when I meet a client, and because I've only been working in this community for such a short period of time, for 3 years, and a majority of that has been through the pandemic, right? I've not gotten to know a lot of individuals in the community yet, like I did in Gila River, where I knew a lot of people. I was there for 12 years. Here, I'm reestablishing myself with the community, and we do get, individuals who come through several times. And their first reaction when they meet you is always, well, I shouldn't say always, but, oftentimes can be standoffish. They are on the defense already, right from the moment you get them. They think you're going to be against them like everybody else. And when you talk to them about not just their case, but just generally about them, because I think what I talk a lot about, because I deal, I handle a lot of cases where individuals have substance abuses, is, okay, regardless of how we decided in the end, we're going to resolve the case. I always talk to them about long-term, and it gets a little bit more like, this has nothing to do with your case, but this is what I can see. And, I hope that you address certain stuff, like, I don't, if there's any issues anywhere down the line, please contact me and see what we can do before it gets out of control, because I do care about them even outside of their sentence, even if they're done with probation. I've gone to individuals to their probation appointments and to their behavioral health appointments to get their initial connection with those individuals, because I already know, like, my client, this particular client, maybe can't read or write very well. And I don't want them, and they pretend, right? They pretend they can, they pretend they understand. And I want to make sure that their probation officer understands they cannot, and that I'm going to be there and I'm be monitoring to make sure that they don't just do whatever with them, and don't, and also with behavioral health. So I've gone to appointments with my clients just to make sure that they get the treatment that they deserve, because sometimes they don't advocate for themselves, or they're too embarrassed to say, I can't read and write. And if we all can do that a little bit, just showing outside of their case that they're just not a case, they're actually somebody you care about, and you really want to see something good for them long term, that's what I think makes a huge difference. Even if they don't get a resolution they understand, because they trust that you did the best you could to help them, right?
Yeah, no, those are great thoughts to close on. And I have to say, I'm really grateful that we had a chance to partner with Gila River in 2013. I have to say thanks to the Department of Justice. A grant allowed us to have our first partnership with a Native community, and it was Gila River, and it's been a real gift to Gideon's Promise ever since. And we've got some wonderful friends, and I know a whole new community of advocates through that partnership. So Melanie, I'm grateful to you for being a leader in that office, a leader in this fight, a committed, compassionate public defender. And as we close out, I will end as we always end by saying this is Jonathan wrapping it up.
Thank you for listening to the Justice Wrap Up. To continue learning more about how essential public defenders are in criminal justice reform, please visit our website at gideonspromise.org to make a donation. Join us each month wherever you cast. Subscribe to our newsletter, share your thoughts, and let us know what's on your mind.